Wilde's attorney, and if any questions come up as to the as to where it stands or where it is in the courts or legal appeals or whatever, Mr. Wilde has the expertise to speak to those points. Plus, he looks nice on television. You were told it might be a good idea to wait for 9 months before applying for citizenship?
No, this was after the bust in England, before applying to visit the United States.
I see.
That it would be a cool idea. That's sort of, it would be a cool idea.
What is your status in the country right now?
That's why Leon's here. What am I, Leon?
Well, John was charged with being deportable in the United States for being an overstay by a very interesting turn of events. The district director of the New York Immigration Service charged him with being an overstay after he gave him a 2-week extension of his time. And in the middle of that 2-week period, he was here on
visa, right? And he overstayed. Is that the position?
He had originally come in as a visitor, and he had had a number of extensions. And then finally, the Immigration Service gave him a 2-week extension. And right in the midst of that 2-week final extension, they revoked the period that they had given him, and they declared that he had been here as an overstay for the week that he had been here with their authorization. And thus the Immigration Service created the very status that they charged him with being deportable for. We fought that deportation case, and a decision was finally rendered after about a year that he was, in fact, an overstay. Now, the essential problem in a deportation case and what lies beneath the surface is that the only way one can get out of it is either to ask permission to leave this country voluntarily and get out, which John was not prepared to do, or to apply for permanent resident status. And the law prescribes that any person who had ever been convicted of any offense, no matter how small, relating to the possession of marijuana, at any time in his lifetime and under any circumstances, cannot obtain residence. And so that what was happening when the government did this little routine of revoking his stay and charging him with being an overstay, they were locking him actually into a position where the only application he could make was one which they were pretty sure he could never succeed in.
Which was?
Pardon?
The application that he would make would be one that he would never succeed in. Permanent residence.
Yes.
All right.
Now, we applied for permanent residence for John and for Yoko. We won Yoko's case, and she was granted residence. But John's case was denied. We went up on appeal before the Board of Immigration Appeals, and we lost there as well. And we are now before the United States Circuit Court of Appeals on the same issue. And basically, on that case, the issue resolves itself into whether or not what happened in England amounts to possession under our law, and whether what he possessed in England was actually marijuana under our law. You see, the substance which John was convicted of possessing, he pleaded guilty, was called cannabis resin. That's a generic term, and it includes a number of substances. We had one of the top experts in the United States, a psychiatrist at Harvard Medical School, testify, and he gave the only expert testimony. And his testimony was that cannabis resin is not marijuana, and marijuana is not cannabis resin. Yet the Immigration Service came to the conclusion that it was marijuana. And finally, with respect to the possession aspect, our law in the United States is very clear with respect to possession. You cannot be convicted in this country for possessing an illicit substance unless it is clear that you had a knowledge as to the illicit nature of the substance that you had. In England, at the time of John's conviction, a law existed which had been uniformly criticized throughout the world and which was later repealed. And it provided that the government did not have to prove that you knew the nature of the substance whatsoever. So that if you possessed a bottle...
I know that this is not excuse me.
Yeah, I was just going to say one interesting point was that when they started the initial case, they claimed that it was a local New York problem, and they also started the proceedings against John and Yoko. Well, halfway or a third of the way through the proceedings, or whatever the number is, they discovered that actually Yoko did not have any record in England, and also she had a green card by a previous American husband. So this local case that was just another case like any other alien, which is what they kept claiming, was not one of those cases. So then they suddenly had to find something else, which was this overstay business, which they pulled a fast one. And so they had to give Yoko the green card. And now, one of them, I think his name is Green, keeps writing to the papers saying they're still treating me like a normal citizen, a normal alien, right? Only on overstay. They're no longer mentioning about marijuana and the original normal reason I was being thrown out. And it's just interesting that the case keeps changing to suit them, you know?
I want to ask you a question about that in a second. We'll continue after these final announcements from our affiliated station.